Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop, and today we're making a shadow box with dovetails. Ooh. For this project, we're going to be starting off with Filipino mahogany. This is actually a really fun one, and a lot of big box stores actually sell this. So if you want to find it, they sell it as mahogany. It's a very relatively soft wood. It is about the same as poplar and tends to have fairly straight grain, though you can get some of them with interlocking or twisting grain. We're also going to be doing this with dovetails in the corners, and I want to have a single dovetail on the door glass and then a pair on the back, and so that means one of them is going to be small and then two of them are going to be larger. And so it's a lot like making regular dovetails, except for the layout is a little bit more complicated, and you'll see how this comes out in the future. You can see there's a line in between the small tail and the first large tail. That will be where we cut it to put in the split so that the door can open up. Making dovetails is one of those things that seems very complicated to people and is really scary, but it's a fairly basic skill. When you're first getting into it, though, don't expect your dovetails to be absolutely perfect. Expect them to be functional. Functional, most people can do on their first try. However, there's going to be gaps, there's going to be some sloppiness here and there, but it's amazing what glue and a few small wedges can do. I have several videos on making dovetails, more than several, quite a few of them, and showing several different methods and styles and different ways of doing it. Different people will find different things that they like, but as long as you go slowly and actually think through things and make sure you mark out where the waste is so you're not cutting on the wrong side, you should be pretty good. I also have a couple videos on how to do them quickly and how do you gang cut them and do a bunch of them at the same time. So it's one of those things where you can do them really sloppy and fast and make them done, and they're still perfectly fine, good functioning dovetails, or you can spend a lot of time and really make them special. A lot of people like to make dovetails as if there's some sort of special, amazing thing, and it used to be that they were something that was kind of hidden and not shown because they were an ugly joint, whereas now they're kind of like the beginning of woodworking. We're going to do the dovetail on all four sides. Until about this point, I realized, whoops, I cut the dovetail on a wrong board. This was the cutoff that I had left over. So that means I'm actually going to have to cut this down and then cut the pins one more time because, oops. Yeah, a shooting board is a fantastic thing. One of the most important things with dovetails is that the ends be perfectly square and true all the way around. We don't want to have them sloppy at all. We want to have really good, clean edges on the ends so we can mark off that and get a good measurement. And as long as you make those ends good and clean and square, you can actually get relatively good dovetails easily, or with a little bit of practice. So there, now we've got this board done, we can put this together and make sure everything fits and is the way it should go. Next thing we need to do is cut a groove in this. We need to actually put a groove where the back panel will go. We're not going to put a groove in the front because I don't want to fully capture the glass. I want the glass to be something I can take out. So for that, we're actually going to be cutting a rabbet. And here is a 1/2-inch rabbet. This is where the glass will be going on the front edge of the box. It will be a rabbet to hold the glass in, and then pins come in and lock it in place. On the back side, we're going to be putting in a 1/4-inch groove to put in a back board on it. And I love using this number 50. It is fast and efficient. It is a great little plow plane. You can use it to make beads. I have a couple videos actually comparing Stanley 50s to 45s and 55s, and they each have their own. But for the groove, I'm going to be using a pre-made grooving plane. I have several videos making grooving planes. They are incredibly easy to make, and it was one of the first planes that I ever made, and that one there is actually the one I still use. So now let's put it back together and make sure everything is the way we want to. We want to make sure our back is the right size, so I'm going to use some sticks here to actually measure out what is the inside. Now normally I would resaw a board and cut something down to 1/4 inch, but in this case the back is eventually going to be covered with all sorts of other things, and so I'm just going to use a piece of 1/4 inch faced luan. And so this is an oak faced luan to go with it, just because I happen to have it in stock. I probably would have used something else. I believe they're even going to be painting the back of this so that it has the things pop out on it. You get a lot of splinters and burrs on the back of this stuff, and that's not a problem because it's on the back of the back, which makes them great. For the glue up, though, I'm going to actually glue this and lock it in place. So we want to make sure everything is the way it should be before we actually get into doing the glue up. For the glue on this, I'm going to be using epoxy. Why epoxy over glue and other things? Epoxy gives a lot more setup time for this. I could use just about anything on here, but I had a little bit of epoxy left in there. It was just about enough to do this batch. So total boat high performance for the win. And it is a really phenomenal, especially if you have any gaps. If your dovetails aren't perfect, epoxy is the way to go because it is phenomenal at gap filling. I want to make sure I'm focusing on the long grain sections of the dovetail where it connects long grain to long grain. On the end grain, it does help some, but not as much. Then we make sure we put the back in before putting the last piece on and clamp it all down. Clamps will be running in multiple directions so that it squeezes from all sides and actually gets it tight across. If you make the dovetails perfect, then you may not need clamps, but clamps are always nice to have on there. Now I'm going to be cutting off this small piece of excess scrap to make some plugs because we had grooves that went all the way out the inside. And the nice thing about the grooves is you can hide them really well. As long as you have the same original wood, you can make little pieces that fit into the groove holes, and they make great plugs. Just put them in, and while the glue is drying, they lock themselves in. Then you can come back and clean them up just like you would with the dovetails. Use a flush cuff saw to get them close, and then come in with the plane. With the plane, you're always going to plane in towards the middle of the board. And it was around this point I realized it's not quite as sharp as it needs to be, especially in this case where I'm going to be going cross grain and doing some interesting things, smoothing this out. I want this blade to be really nice and sharp. I can start by taking down the heavy spots, doing the scrubbing right at the beginning. That's any of the end grain that's sticking up past, and then I can take my long cut. Now we need to cut this thing apart so that we can get some glass into this groove. So I'm going to set up my marking gauge and mark back however far that point is back to the back side of the rabbet that we put in. And I didn't call it a groove, even though we were actually cutting a groove, because once we cut this open, it will be a rabbet. And I'm going to start on the corner and cut down this way. And I just quickly realized this is one of those places where a Japanese saw really should shine. But there are times where it just doesn't, and I found it digging into the sidewall a little bit more than I wanted. I did 90% of the work, though, with a cross-cut handsaw. The panel saw really does a great job here. The only problem is that the blade went in far, and I had to make sure I didn't run into the far side. So now we can take it apart, and hey, we've got a lid to this. We need to clean them all up and get rid of any marks from the saws, as well as get the edge down on the rabbet. I left a little bit more material here than I needed just to make sure I could work around with it. And that was something I had to plan for right off at the beginning. The nice thing about these is when you're running around this, you go with the grain on one side, and then at the corner you should be going 45 degrees. And that way you're kind of going skewed to both grains, and it actually works out pretty well. I just want to make sure that you take your time on it because it's very easy to mess it up. I'm going to come in here and just get rid of all the little burrs or anything sticking out on the edge, anything poking in, and take the time to really clean it down. I have this held between two sets of dogs so that I can work on one corner here, and then I rotate and work on the other corner. A card scraper works really nicely to get into this tight corner and clean it up and give yourself a really beautiful little rabbet. And again, we're going to work on the face and the back of the whole box as well. We're going to be putting in some magnets to hold it, and I just want to make sure everything works out right. So we're going to do a test drill first. I want two of these to then fit inside, and they're just small enough to fit into the rim here. I'm going to drill them into the lid. I'm going to put 4 across the bottom, which tends to be just about the right length. A little bit of super glue, and then slide in 2 magnets and pop them off. I like putting some tape on a piece of metal. It allows me to put them down into the corner and then slide them off, and then the tape comes off so that I'm not leaving it on the metal. And I just want to make sure that they are flush. I don't want them to be below flush. I don't want them to be above flush. I want them to be perfectly flush and smooth. And this method actually works out very, very well for that. A little bit of activator on there does the trick, and they're ready to go. On the top, we're going to be putting in 2 of these nickel hinges. I got these at the local hardware store. They're nothing terribly special. I mean, I could spend a couple $100 and get some heavy-duty, big brass ones. But for something like this, they work out very, very well. There isn't enough weight on the front of the door, so I'm actually having to move the hinges back. So the fulcrum of the hinge, where it rotates, is actually back onto the main body. And that's perfectly fine as long as everything works well when it opens and closes. You also see I have it here in the vise to hold it together and make sure that they're nice and tight. Put a little wax in the screws, run them down in, and there is our good test fit. The next thing we do is put magnets on the main body side. We have them on the lid, but we want to make sure that they match. And not only match in the exact same location, but we want to also make them match so that negatives and positives go together. So I'm going to put one magnet on the edge on each one, and I'm just going to tap them down in there, and that puts a recess into the bottom. It just puts a light mark that I can come back in and drill the hole. Then I'm going to put a magnet in there, but I want to make sure that it is the correct direction. I don't want two south poles pushing against each other. So I'm going to put a piece of tape on the lid, put two magnets on that, and then flip the lid over and allow that to push them into place. That means I need to get the super glue into each one of them and relatively quickly push these all down in here and make sure that they all go into their holes. Then I'm going to put a couple clamps on there just to hold them briefly while everything sets. And that way you know that the magnets are all lined up and they're all in the same orientation with north and south and east and west and all those directions. We pull it out, pull some tape out, and it bonded a little bit more blue tape than I normally want to. Normally I would end up putting packing tape on the top, and that works phenomenally. It peels off really easily, but I was in a bit of a hurry and I couldn't find the packing tape, so I thought blue tape would do fine, but it left a little bit on there. I'm going to use the chamfer plane sled to put a few light chamfers on this. Nothing detailed, nothing heavy, just a little bit on here. And I really like how this thing goes in here very, very quickly. I can also use the rabbeting block plane to put a chamfer on the inside, because I can rabbet right down into that corner and get a nice clean chamfer on the inside edge as well. I love the look of a chamfer. It's amazing what that does. Now, for finishing this, we're going to use a really new, high-tech, high-quality, traditional boiled linseed oil. I know, surprise, surprise, but I really love the way it comes out, especially with this Filipino mahogany. It just pops the grain out and looks beautiful. And it's a simple finish that works really, really well. We're going to coat everything down with it, let it sit for a while, let it soak up as much as it wants, and then wipe off the excess, apply some paste wax, and it's a really simple finish. On this one, I actually ended up, after putting the paste wax on, I decided I want to actually do a poly coat on the outside. And I just put 2 quick coats just to add a little bit of protection to it, and it came out really, really well for that. For the glass, it pops in, and then I'm going to use a couple nails. And one of the nice things with the Filipino mahogany is they can just slide in here. You don't have to hammer them in and break the glass. Yeah, been there, done that. But that is the case. Works out really well, and now our church can fill it up with memories for our pastor. So happy. So there you have it. This is actually a shadow box for my pastor. They are leaving our church after 11 years and moving on to the next place. So our church is putting together a whole display that will go in this. And I wanted to make something a little bit nice and special for it. So it's made with Filipino mahogany and then an oak plywood for the backing. And relatively simple, but a nice design. I like it with the split dovetail, so there's a separate dovetail for the front glass piece. And I really like how it came out. Really nice, simple design, relatively lightweight, so it can hang on the wall. And I hope Pastor likes it as well. So if you have any questions about this, thoughts, ideas, snide remarks, or just want to say hi down below, then go ahead and throw that in the comments down below. Thank you. Honestly, when you do that, it does help out the channel. There's a whole bunch of people who just put comment down below. And thank you. That means more than I can say, because it helps us grow, gets it in front of more people, and works this whole YouTube algorithm thing. Thank you for that. If you'd like to take it even farther, though, there are all these names over here. Those are all the fantastic, wonderful, benevolent, and gorgeous people over on Patreon. Because without patrons, we wouldn't exist. We are completely sponsored by you guys. Without you, the lights wouldn't be on and this channel wouldn't be here. So if you'd like to help out with that and help us keep going, then think about becoming a patron or click the little join button or membership over here. And I think that'll do it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. So a shadow box. This is what you need when you're in the Lord of the Rings and you need to go really, really fast and you're a wizard.